This is a gentle movement, a lift and set. And then as it comes across, maybe like you talked about, I might want to speed that up again. So I'm just going to just gently lift and adjust that motion. And really, that concept is an important one, because a lot of times guys flip and, kind of jerk the fly. And fishing dry flies on the Deschutes, you learn really quick that flipping motion, you're going to do that exactly the moment a steelhead tries to come up and eat your fly, and you can't get away from him, right?
That was Rob Crandall describing how to properly mend the rod for steelhead. This is episode number 62 of the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today. We'll help you on your fly fishing journey with classic stories covering steelhead fishing, fly tying, and much more.
How's it going, everyone? Thanks for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show. Please take a moment and head over to wetflyswing.com/subscribe and subscribe so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes of the show. In today's episode, I chat with Rob Crandall, owner of Watertime Outfitters and a winter steelhead master. We talk about his 5-step process to catch steelhead, what the hover is, and how it will put your fly at the correct depth and the perfect leader length. Rob goes into detail on mending and breaks down some huge tips that may be a game changer for you this year. Don't miss this as Rob shares a cool little tip to easily know how deep your fly is before you even get started on the water. So, without further ado, here's Rob Crandall. How's it going, Rob?
Hey, it's going great, Dave. Happy New Year.
Yeah, good to have you on here. This is kind of prime time. We're kind of in the steelhead season. Things are nice and cool. There's some snow on the ground out there. If you're heading over the hill, it's that time of year. I wanted to dig into a bunch of winter steelhead tips and talk about what you do out there as a guide. And you've put I think you've been doing this for like 30 years, right? Or somewhere in that
sneaking up on it, believe it or not. Yeah, it's like 26 or so.
26, yeah. So you're getting close. So yeah, I want to jump into all that. But before we do, maybe you can just talk about how you first got into fly fishing, then how that all came into like steelhead fishing.
Yeah, no problem. Well, I grew up out near the town of Barton, if you can call it a town, but it's right near the Clackamas River. And when I was about 8 or 9 years old, my buddy Craig, he got a fly fishing combo kit. And I thought, man, that is just great. I need to get one of those. And sure enough, I got one for Christmas, and that kind of got me started. My dad really wasn't much of a fly fisherman, but he'd take us fishing now and then. And then being close to the Clackamas River with that fly rod was just the perfect starting grounds for me. One of my favorite memories with that old fly rod was actually cracking that line like a whip and chasing my sisters around out in the front yard.
Nice. So you the Clack. I mean, and how old were you when you first got your first rod there?
Oh, I think it was like 8 or 9 years old, somewhere around there.
Cool. So yeah, you got it early, and then how long did it take you before you were out chasing steelhead?
Well, that was quite a progression. So, as a kid, I could run down the Clackamas. I really didn't know what I was doing. There was also some ponds nearby, and they were just packed with bluegill and largemouth bass. So, perfect testing grounds to get that rod bent. And then my first real job was working for Larry's Sports Center, which was a sporting goods store chain that was here in the Northwest. Larry Schoenborn had a bunch of retail stores, and he had a fly shop, and he had regular tackle and ski stuff and camping gear, that kind of thing. And so I met one of my best friends there. He started the day before I did, and we became fast friends and chasing steelhead before work, after work. Any chance that we could get. And Clackamas, Eagle Creek, Sandy, the Salmon River, those are kind of home stomping grounds that we could go and chase fish. And I had so many great experiences, and he was really good at spotting fish. He grew up near Estacada, and he was kind of like one of those bone fishing guides. The first time you've been bone fishing, you go out there and you don't see the fish, and the guide's like right there, right there. So standing, next to him, or looking over his shoulder, I learned a lot, just of steelhead behavior and how they respond to your fly and how they don't respond when they're moving and not moving. And, so it was really kind of just fantastic place for me to kind of get started with, fly fishing and evolving into steelhead and working in, a retail shop where guys are coming in all day long. They're telling their fish stories, and, they're kind of, a lot of times they're conveying their secret spots, and, this spot's good, or, I didn't been out here. I haven't caught anything for a long time over here. So it really was an inspiring place.
That's cool. So were you, and at Larry's, did they have quite a few guys coming in, with, I know there's a lot of gear back there. Was it also a big fly crew that came in there?
Well, really, it was, I think Larry Sports Center, they had a fly shop, and it was fully decked out with Sage and Loomis and some of the best brands of the time. And there weren't a lot of other choices for fly shops at that time. I think you had Country Sport down Portland, maybe one or two others. But so they really were kind of a hub for the local community as far as fly shops go.
Yeah, and were you back in the day when you first, I guess, and what year was this when you were kind of doing Larry's and out there hitting hard for steelhead?
Oh, shoot, I was like 17 years old when I started there. So, I worked there for a number of years, and that kind of got me started for, I chased them around on the Clackamas, and I'd catch an incidental one. But that's really where I started hanging out with guys that were really good at it. Gotcha. And there were some old timers at the shop that kind of took me under their wing and could see that I had a passion for it. And they would take me out, show me their tricks. And I remember I caught my first steelhead on the swung fly on the Clackamas River, on a fly that a guy named Jim Colthurst there at he ran the fly shop for a while. He shared this pattern called the dust mop, and it was this bright, this blood red marabou, and it was the all marabou pattern and a lot of movement. And I remember swinging that to summer steelhead on the Clackamas and actually seeing the fish kind of move to the fly and eat it. And that was just, from that moment on, it was really kind of triggered that passion of the swing.
Yeah. And so I just think about the year again. So let me make a guess. Are you 47 years old? Well, how old are you?
45.
Okay,
now.
45. That was pretty close guess. So then we're talking. You're talking 30 years ago when you were kind of roughly in the early 1990s when you were at Larry's. Yeah. So that's cool. Okay. Yep. Yeah. And so the swung fly. What was the transition? Were you before that doing kind of a little bit of everything, nymphing, or was it, what were you doing?
Oh, yeah. I was a, purveyor of all things, as fishing. And I really feel like I've got a good, depth of understanding of what's really happening out there because of the different strategies that I employed over the years. And, it was kind of interesting. I grew up in Barton, which is right next to the Clackamas River, Barton Park. There was the old Barton store, and Larry Ferguson there. When I was a kid, in my early teens, I would tie flies, and he would buy them. I don't know why, because they weren't that great, but he would buy flies for me. And then I'd be in the store there, and Larry was a crusty old hilarious guy. He always had a dirty joke for me, which was not good at that age. But he had this guy coming in named Jim Bradbury. And Jim Bradbury had moved from the East Coast. He was a crappie fisherman back there, and he used these crappie jigs. Well, he came out here on the Clackamas, and he started tying up these bigger, instead of crappie jigs, bigger marabou jigs. And those marabou jigs were absolutely deadly on steelhead. And that was really kind of when jig fishing kind of started. And he was really one of the guys that got that going here in the Northwest. And as a kid, I was just soaking up everything I could. And I remember actually, skipping school and ended up at below Rivermill Dam. Jim Bradbury was down there like every day. And that guy, if he wasn't catching them on red, he'd catch them on black. And if he wasn't on black, he'd catch them on. And he would consistently catch fish, while he's down there smoking like a chimney. So that was kind of some of my early day stuff.
Okay. Yeah. And I wanted to get a little bit into the Spey, two-handed game and talk about that little transition. But maybe before we get into more of that, we can just talk about, you mentioned the Clackamas a few times. Maybe you can just talk about how you get into, winter steelhead on the Clackamas, as far as, how you either, you or how you get your clients into it. Maybe go through the process from, you get on the river, what's the first steps, what do you use in rod, kind of that whole process, and any tips you have along the way.
Yeah, sure. Well, so my basic winter steelhead approach is typically with a spey rod. Using, my favorite is a 7-weight. My favorite right now is the Sage X rod. It's a 12-foot 7-weight. Is just awesome to cast. And I'm going to load that up with a reel that balances that well. I've got a 525 Skagit line on that, and I've been using the Grip Shooter running line by RIO. And one thing I just throw out on reels, I love that Sage Domain reel. It's got a drag setting on it that has a numerical marker on it.
Cool.
I keep mine at 2.5. I know that drag set just right for that steelhead crab. So, and then, so the gear is kind of where we start. On the end of that Skagit head, I'm going to have typically a 10-foot sink tip, and that's going to vary depending on what the water conditions are. When I head out for the day, I kind of coach my clients in that there's 3 basic things that'll help them catch more fish. And kind of there's a lot of things that go into it, but there's 3 things that you just kind of drill down, that if they come to these 3 things, they're gonna be more successful. First of all is keep moving, and that's moving through the run. That's that cadence, that progression through the run. I feel it's really one of the more important aspects that help trigger a response from steelhead. So that's 1. 2 is manage your swing. And when I talk about managing the swing, I talk about how that fly is moving across. Think about how the speed of the water is influencing your line, how it's influencing the depth of your fly. Where is that fly at? How quickly is it moving? Is it deep? Is it shallow? Are you snagging up? So managing your swing, and that may mean slowing your speed of the swing down. It may mean speeding it up. And then the third thing that's just like the most difficult, challenging part of this winter spey strategy is that when you finally do get that grab, don't screw it up.
Yeah.
So many times, right? Guys, you feel that tug and then they're so excited. There's this electricity that courses through you, and then they give it that big yank and they pull that fly right out of their mouth.
Yeah.
So you've been there before, right?
Oh yeah. That's one of the hard things. Yeah, you get so excited. You got to just take a moment. A lot of times, they'll set the hook for you, so it's not as big of a deal. But yeah, well, the hard thing is when you start getting the kind of a player on and it's just kind of messing with it. It might be a little more typical with summer steelhead, but yeah, that's the tough part, is to like how long do you wait? What do you do next? What happens if you get a bump? Do you put the same cast back on, and do you change a fly? I mean, there's all sorts of things after that. So you mentioned about moving through the water and how quickly and speed. That, I think that is it's a great point, and I think also a challenge, because how does somebody that's out there fishing a run, say they're new to this run, they don't really know the depth of the run, they don't know how deep it is. When, say, a new person's out on a new run, how would you coach them to know that they're at the right depth?
So that's the question, right? And that's really why I teamed up with Fly Fish TV, and we produced a 90-minute DVD talking about Winter Spey Strategies, because essentially you can be out there on the water, winter steelhead fishing, and casting your brains out all winter long and not catch a darn thing because your fly is not in the zone. And so the water's cold, the fish are cold. I mean, it's not uncommon for the water temperature to be in the 30s, so they're not moving for your fly like they do for, a summer steelhead. Come all the way to the top, throw spray in the air when they grab your fly. It's just not happening, right? So to be consistent with winter steelhead, we've got to get the fly down. And I like to try to get at least half the depth of the water, and I try to achieve what I call the hover, which is essentially balancing your sink tip, your fly, and your swing speed so that your fly can hover at that half the depth. So in other words, in contrast, you might have too heavy a sink tip, so you're ripping it too fast so you don't snag up, or too light a sink tip, and you're not getting down near the fish. So I kind of have a 5-step approach where I have 5 different techniques that I'll utilize to get the fly where it needs to be depending on the conditions. But one of the things you can do, there's a really great starting point for that guy that's never stepped foot into that run before. Wade out into the water, into that steelhead speed water, which is about walking speed, 3.2 to 3.8 miles per hour. And with the sink tip and fly that you have, before you even make a cast, get the sink tip right at the end of the rod tip and hold that rod tip upstream from you, right at the surface of the water. And what's going to happen is that sink tip's going to settle down in there, and your fly is going to hang back, and you should be able to see with a 10-foot sink tip, you should have your fly should come right about next to you, and you'll see if it's right on the surface. You'll see if it's just digging in on the bottom or if it's somewhere in between. So that's a really good starting point.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Okay. And then I guess as you get into it, if you're hitting the bottom a lot, then you're down too deep, and I guess there's going to be times where maybe you're able to see your fly too, so you can kind of see where it is. No, that's a good point. And the DVD is another. I definitely watched a good chunk of that DVD, and had in a past episode we talked about your that DVD, and it is a good one. You go into a bunch of tips there. I'm trying to find the episode that I had. Remind me who the producer of the show of your DVD was.
Oh yeah, so we did that with Gene Herring of Fly Fish TV. And we also teamed up with Dean Finnerty, a guy down on the Southern Oregon, and Marty Shepard.
Oh, and Marty. Okay.
Yeah.
I had, so I'm just looking at the notes here. I had Dean on in episode 19. So that's definitely was a good one. He covered the North Umpqua. That was a good one. And then Gene had on in episode 23, and we talked about just all over.
Right on.
Yeah, video production. So those were too good. I actually had the first 30 episodes of this. We're mostly steelhead, so I'm kind of swinging back to you now that we're in a kind of winter time. But yeah, so that is a good resource for sure. And so now you talked a little bit about the water. We talked about the water depth. What about visibility and clarity? How do you when you get a river that maybe is muddying up or it's not super clean? Do you fish it differently? How would you fish that differently than if you had kind of say the opposite, low and clear?
So, water clarity impacts us all winter long, and how we respond to that is really indicator. The clearer water, water that's low and clear, typically is cold. So often, to me, that means when the water's colder, the fish are not moving through the system as quickly. Lower water means that oftentimes I'm going to find fish lower in the river system, so it impacts what section of the river I might fish, and then it also is definitely going to impact how I achieve that swing and achieve the hover per se by what sink tip I'm using, what flies I'm using, and how I approach the water. When the water's low and clear, those fish are typically going to be in deeper little slots, they're going to be places that they feel protected and more comfortable. And so how I literally walk up to the water can be an important aspect of my approach. Now, in contrast, when that water is up and either has a lot of green or maybe it's blowing out. I mean, these are all winter long. I feel like a weather forecaster as much as a fishing guide. Visibility has a lot to do with it. It also impacts how you move through the run. So if their visibility is reduced, I'm gonna make shorter distance between casts. So I might just one step it instead of two stepping it, or I might two step instead of three. So that makes an impact. And I also feel that, when that water's up, it's typically warmer. So you can watch water temperatures. When we get a good rain, the water temperatures usually spike. And that also, those fish are more aggressive. They're moving. They're going to move to that fly. And so I can tend to get away with, I feel, brighter flies. A lot of people kind of do opposite, darker and darker water. But I've had some of my biggest and best fish, big, bright flies in that water where it's just shifting in that green, from brown to green, and just starting to get that visibility where they're just aggressive and just hammer it.
So it's bright red or pink or something like that.
Yeah, so one of my favorite patterns in that situation is one that Aquaflies is making for me now. It's called the Guide's Choice. And it's got like pink and cerise, ostrich hurl, a flame orange rabbit fur, a bigger, bright fly. And one of my favorite memories of that fly was fishing it on the Clackamas on a day just like we're talking about, where the water's that, just shifting into that beautiful green, but it's been brown and it's on the high side. And I'm swinging down through this run, and I feel this little peck, and I swear it's like a cutthroat. I'm like, go away, little guy, And then the little peck goes to a tug, and then the tug gets a little heavier, and I keep swinging, and the tug gets heavy, and finally it's on, and it landed it was 37.5-inch wild buck.
All on the same, that was on the same swing? It was like multiple taps?
Yes. Yes.
Cool.
He was moving with it. The fly's moving across. The first one's just a peck, and then it gets a little bigger tug, and then it all comes tight.
That's pretty cool. How often do you have, and that was a winter fish?
Yes.
How often do you get those where those winter fish are kind of the real active players?
Well, what I find with winter fish, I find that it's actually pretty common to have multiple tugs, but I would say I wouldn't categorize it as a real active player, in contrast with one on the Deschutes,
right.
And how they move to that fly. I feel like the water's colder and they're just responding a little slower, and so that's just kind of a soft tug, another soft tug. It's not like a heavy rip, it's just tug, tug. He's got it. Wait till it all comes tight.
Nice. So it's 37 inches. So you're in the, maybe the upper teens, 20-pound fish, something like that.
Yeah. It was a really nice fish. I don't remember. I don't think I measured the girth.
Yeah. Gotcha. Do you use on the fly, going back to you mentioned the bright flies, do you have a certain rule of thumb for increasing your size with water that isn't as clear, muddy, or, like we're talking?
Yeah, to a certain extent. It kind of depends on the fishery that I'm fishing. But winter steelhead in general, we can go up to, maybe 4.5 inches would be a big fly for me.
Yeah.
And then, 3.5 is kind of a standard size. And then as the water, say on the contrast, the water's low and clear, I tend to go smaller and darker flies.
Okay. And you mentioned Aquaflies. I'll have at wetflyswing.com/62. I'll have links to some of your patterns so people can take a look at these. But yeah. So how does the Aquaflies? I've never talked about that, Roy. How does that work with that company? You give them patterns, or and then they tie your flies, and you get kind of a percentage off the flies. Is that how that works?
Yeah. That's, the old saying is, what does a fishing guide do with $1 million? He keeps guiding till it's gone. Well, it's going to be I need guys to buy a lot of these flies before I ever get there.
That's right.
Like 3 cents a fly adds up very slowly.
That's true. That's
true. But so it's just kind of a typical royalty type agreement like Umpqua and some of the other companies do. And it's some of my favorite patterns, and they reproduce them. They do an awesome job. They use good quality materials and make a great product.
No, that's cool. So, yeah, thanks for clarifying. I do have there's definitely some guides and people that are interested in, kind of the fly fishing, the business end of it. So I think, some of that stuff, just knowing that there's, different options out there is cool. So, and going back to your 5 steps, so you mentioned your 5-step process. I can't remember if we do you want to clarify again quickly what those 5 steps are? And that was for, maybe you can clarify. Sure. Yeah. Go through that one more time.
Yeah, you bet. So when I think about winter steelhead fishing, as a fishing guide, my job is to produce consistent results for guys with a fly rod. And that's probably one of the most difficult jobs there is. It's summer steelhead's one thing, trout's another thing. We can go out and catch fish every day, but to produce consistent results on winter steelhead, you have to do things a little different. And so this kind of 5-step strategy is kind of the formula that I've worked on that really helps you get your fly deeper and be more effective during the winter months. Because, the fact of the matter is 90% of the grabs that we get when on the swung fly is the last 1/3 of the swing. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that means like a huge percentage of the time that we're fishing, we're just not hooking that many fish. So for me, I'm thinking, well, why is that? And, the fish might have followed it from the middle of the river and he decides to grab it as it gets closer to the bank, that kind of thing. That's one trigger. Okay. I get that. But that doesn't account. I mean, it's a huge percentage. So in my mind, the other thing that correlates is when is your fly deepest? Okay. Mm-hmm. When you cast it out there, it hits the water, and then as it comes across in the swing, it's slowly getting deeper. Well, it's deepest at the end of your swing, right? You let it hang too long, you're snagged up. So in my mind, those two things correlate. The success of our swung fly is most of those fish are grabbing it towards the end of the swing, that last third of the swing. Well, why not get the fly deeper earlier in the swing? So this strategy kind of helps facilitate that. It gives us tools so that we have an arsenal to be more effective during the cold water time of year. So the first step is cast swing step. This is just the standard. This is what everybody does, right? And when I have guys show up, he's talking about trying to be successful during the winter and produce results. If I have summer steelhead guys come, they use their summer steelhead tactics. Sometimes it works, right? Yeah. So cast swing step, that's where we start. And if the conditions are right, the water flows right, the depth is right, and the sink tip happens to be right, that's all we need. But this is the Northwest, so conditions are changing all the time. We're on waters, that vary. The runs are all different. So how do we get that fly deeper? So step 2 is what I call the mend and hold, or the German strategy, mend and hold, right? So this is the adjustment where we start to adjust our swing instead of just throwing it out there and hanging on. The mend and hold is where we make a mend, hold that rod tip for a moment, allow that line to straighten out, and then we steer the fly across. So this kind of comes back to the 3 basic tips to success. Manage your swing. So mend and hold, make that mend right at the 45, allow that fly to come, a line to straighten out, and then steer it across. And then when I do that, instead I'm managing the swing speed versus just throwing it out there and kind of hoping for the best. My goal with the swing speed is to get it to go even swing from where it starts to where it stops. So that means I'm slowing it down a lot when it's in that fast water I throw out in the middle. And then I'm speeding it up a little bit at the end instead of just letting it stall out and kind of grind into the rock. So that's where we kind of keep that concept of our swing momentum in mind.
Gotcha.
So that's step 2.
That's step 2. So if you're in so say river left, you're looking downstream, river left, you're on the left side, the water flow is going from right to your left, and you make that 45 cast out there, and you do I guess you might do an upstream or a downstream mend depending on the situation. But when might you do an upstream mend? I guess if you're trying to get it down, when would you do that?
Most of the time, I'm mending to the upstream side.
Okay.
And so what we're doing with that mend, you think about it in angles, right? So the line starts into the swing at the 45-degree angle, and you're looking downstream. It's 45-degree angle out into the river. There's an angle to the line. The current's pushing against that angle. Now, if you mend and reposition the line so it's more parallel to the current, that when it's parallel, it's going to move more slowly. And when it moves more slowly, your fly gets deeper.
Yeah, so that's going to drop it. So most time you're doing it mending upstream, but then once you make that mend, depending on the current, say you're going in a faster section that goes into a slower section, you might change the hold angle to change what that fly is doing. Yep.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and when I talk about a mend, it's very different than, say, a trout mend where you kind of do a little flip, This is a gentle movement, a lift and set. And then as it comes across, maybe like you talked about, I might want to speed that up again. So I'm just going to just gently lift and adjust that motion. And really, that concept is an important one because a lot of times guys flip and, kind of jerk the fly. And fishing dry flies on the Deschutes, you learn really quick that flipping motion, you're going to do that exactly the moment a steelhead tries to come up and eat your fly, and you can't get away from him, right?
Yep. Gotcha. Okay, so that's step 2. Then what's step 3?
Okay, so step 3 is where we're kind of really more moving away from just the basic cast swing step approach. And this is a simple adjustment. So with step 3, we're simply making a cast. Then we step down with it, allowing the fly to settle in, and then make the swing. So we're just changing the order of things. So cast. By doing that, it allows that fly to kind of settle in. Again, our goal is to get the fly deeper earlier in the swing, expand that zone of success, the wider zone, and get the fly deeper. So the key with this technique is good traction. For me, nothing beats the corkers, the big spikes. That's what I use, unless I'm in my raft or my buddy's, really beautiful wood drift boat. That good traction is imperative to actually make this work. Gotcha.
So the cast then step down is different from the step down then cast and swing. Basically the opposite.
Right. Yeah. So we're just changing the order of things. So essentially, we've made the cast. The fly is in the water, and then we do our step down with that fly in the water. And sometimes I'll even time that so that it's the step down is kind of allowing that fly to settle in at just the right time. So let me give you an example. You're fishing through this beautiful run. It's kind of top of the run. It's got a fast, hard riffle and then it flattens out into a sweet run. Well, when you throw it into that fast, hard riffle, if you do the step down as it's in that heavy stuff, it's really not impacting the depth of the fly. If you do that step down, you do it right as that fly is coming off of that fast water, just getting to the edge of the could-be steelhead water. So timing is an aspect of that helps you finesse and get that fly where it needs to be.
Gotcha. Okay, so you're not necessarily, again, it's not one of those things where you're just doing the same thing every time. You might be, depending on what's going on with the currents out there, you might be stepping down at a later in the swing. I mean, you might make a cast, let it swing halfway, and then step down, and then let it swing the rest of the way.
Yeah, I rarely move down much once it's really into the swing.
Yeah.
I'm more like if it's that edge of that heavy current, because once you're stepping down as it's swinging, you're really kind of it's more difficult to be consistent. So with this strategy, all the 5 steps that I like to employ, the line is more or less under tension, and the whole goal is to get that fly at the right depth on the swing. So if you're stepping down while it, kind of in the middle of the swing, it's really kind of, it's just less predictable where that fly is going to be.
Gotcha.
So
okay.
It's just the first part. Right as it's just coming off that fast water, I might do a quick step down, but you don't want to be halfway through the swing.
No.
In my experience.
No. Okay.
And stepping down.
Okay, cool. Then and then step 4.
Okay, so 4 and 5 this is where our on-water strategies classes that we teach are is a whole lot easier to illustrate than to describe. But essentially what I'm doing on step 4 is what I call the slip swing. And the slip swing is I make that cast, I might throw just above 45, so that as it starts to straighten out, I'm going to make a mend. But when I make that mend, I've got some extra line reserved that I have not casted out. And it's enough line that I can move the rod tip from 45 degrees downstream to 45 degrees upstream. Okay, so I've made the cast. I'm just going into the mend as the fly's hitting that 45-degree angle downstream from me. Slip that extra line out so the rod tip position is now upstream, and then as it's coming into the swing, I'm lowering that rod tip down and then bringing it across. Cool. So again, winter steelhead, the water's cold. The idea is get the fly deeper earlier in the swing. Yeah. So the next step is just kind of a further iteration of the slip swing, and I call it the slip step swing. And essentially I'm doing the same thing. I make that cast. I have some extra line I slip out, changing the rod tip position from 45 downstream to 45 upstream. And then as I lower that rod tip down to the swing point, I'm also stepping down. So that allows you to really settle in the fly and swing it across. Now, I'll do I do some classes where we go out on the water and we show all these 5 different strategies. And as I go through them, invariably with that last one, I'm going to snag up. I'm going to hit the bottom. It's not one that you would use all the time, but it's a tool that you have in your quiver to utilize at the appropriate time.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So basically you're just trying to, again, getting back to that depth, trying to get down to the right depth depending on the water. And those are definitely good tips. I think people, if they haven't heard about those, can implement those, this winter for sure. That's good stuff. Well, is there, I guess, I've got a number of different questions here, but anything else you want to hit on as far as depth or swinging speeds? I think we covered a good chunk of it there.
I guess the only other thing I would throw out is that, as you go through a run, you might change your strategies. And that's why, having the 5 different tools in your quiver per se, top of the run, you might need to do cast step swing, and then you might just switch to cast swing step as it mellows out. Or if you're, say, on this beautiful run on the Kilchis River and that deep green slot is on the far side, and you know that when you cast out over there, your fly's at the shallowest. It doesn't get deep till it gets on the gravel bar by your feet. So that's where that slip swing might be utilized. And so just kind of utilizing the different tools at different times. And a lot of it you can adjust by the sink tip and the fly alone.
Yeah.
And then, making slight adjustments with these different techniques.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, we might have, if we have time, we'll talk a little more about the sink tips and things like that. But you mentioned the rod, the 12-foot 7 weight. Do you typically use, is that kind of your all-around rod? And is there how big of a fly will that rod handle? As big of a fly as you want? You mentioned the 4.5-inch fly. Is that can you throw the monster stuff? No problem with that?
Well, I can, but if the guy, I'm comfortable throwing pretty much whatever on the T14, a big fly. It works just fine. Yeah. But if your timing's off, with the really big stuff, a 13.5-foot rod might be a little easier to throw those out. But that 12-footer is just kind of my favorite, just kind of all around steelhead. for most conditions.
Gotcha. And the back to that sinking line. So is that 10-foot, that typical line, is that a T14 or is that a lighter sink tip you're using? The kind of the all around.
So if I was going to say I have one sink tip, it would be a T11, 10 feet long. But the fact of the matter is conditions change so much throughout the winter. I'm going to use a wide variety of sink tips depending on the day and the water levels. And anywhere from say like the Mo tips where you've got a 5 and a 5 of T11, 5 feet of T11, 5 feet of intermediate, up to say like a 10-foot T14. There's a wide range that those can accommodate. So on any given day, depending on what the water conditions are, I might be using one of those, but my main one's a T11.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, getting back to, I guess I had a few other questions here, just kind of random ones. We're talking about the Clackamas River, which is a fairly good sized river. I mean, what would you say is the average kind of width of the channel across the run you're fishing on the Clack?
Oh man, the river itself is, 100, 150 feet wide in a lot of places.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good sized river.
So it's a big sized river. And I think you also fish some of the smaller coastal rivers. Well, you mentioned the Kilches, but there's a few other small ones. On the smaller ones that say maybe they're only 50 feet across, are you still swinging with the same sort of techniques?
Yeah, same strategies. What's kind of fun to do on the smaller waters is to switch to a switch rod. So my favorite there is 11-foot 7-weight Sage makes. I love their little X rod. It's super light. It's really responsive. I can have alder trees hanging over me and moss dripping water in the back of my neck, and just still firing little bullet cast underneath the trees. And in those smaller waters, you're not necessarily worried about how far you can cast or covering the run. You're more worried about catching the branches on the other side of the river, So it kind of adds a whole different concept to your swung fly casting. Spey casting is how tight is my loop there?
That's right. Yeah, that is challenging. So basically, yeah, you're swinging even when you get super small. As far as when you get the wetted width down pretty small, what's if you do get a fish on one of those smaller rivers, or maybe just in general, how do you land that fish? Any tips on landing a steelhead?
Yeah. So just in general, when it comes to catching a steelhead on a spey rod, what I find is a lot of customers of mine, they might not be putting enough bend in that rod. Having that rod bend, good parabolic bend is really important. And then having your drag set appropriately. So sometimes guys have their drag set too tight and the fish starts taking off, the rod flattens out. If the rod's flattening out, there's too much tension, too much drag. If the drag is too light, it can be problematic as well. So the fish rips out line and the rod's bent, and then it kind of surges back up, to starting to kind of straightening out. That can cost you fish. So having your drag set appropriately is really important. And then once you got a hot fish, trying to keep that distance short. If you're weighted out waist deep into a run and the fish is ripping down into your backing, it's time to get to shallower water where you're much more mobile. You can move quickly if you have to get downriver, because the farther they are downriver, especially with these big Skagit lines that we're using to make casting so easy, well, it's also, that makes it easier for fish to get away because there's a lot of drag on those lines. So those are a few tips I would throw out for, fighting fish. Okay.
Yeah. And I was thinking, I was just watching something that Ed Ward had on there, and I've never really done this before purposefully, but he was showing, he had this fish that he was landing, and basically as he got it in, this is towards the end, if you're not using a net, he basically loosened up on his drag, and then as the fish gets in, within 15 feet or so, he just pulls up on the rod and basically strips out a bunch of line, and then he just goes up and the fish is kind of laying there and he grabs the leader. and it pulls it in, and is that something that you've either seen or done or think that's just kind of a unique thing? Because I always think like, well, I probably don't want to grab the leader on that steelhead because it just takes one head shake and he's gone. But do you typically grab the leader at times?
Well, first of all, I would never argue with Ed Ward.
That's true. That's good for you.
Personally, when I'm guiding, to be honest with you, I use a rubberized net, and I really feel that is the best for the fish because, one, I can get them handled much more quickly.
Yeah.
When you're trying to tail a fish, especially a beginning angler that doesn't know how much pressure to put on a fish, you're kind of over-exhausting these fish.
Yeah.
And so I find that a net really makes it much quicker on the battle. It's better on the fish. The rubberized mesh doesn't hurt them. I get them in the net, they calm down, grab their tail, turn them on their side, and get that hook out and on their way much, much more effectively than when you're wrestling with them along the bank without a net. It's more of a challenge. Now, granted, I don't carry a net when I go fishing by myself, right? So, that's another challenge. What I tend to do when I'm, say, landing a fish by myself, you got a 12, 13-foot rod. That's a long rod to be dealing with a fish, right?
Yeah.
So the appropriate amount of line out is really important. I see beginner guys bring in way too much line. You can't get to the
no.
Leave enough line out so that fish can you can slide it in right in front of you. What I like to do is kind of kneel down behind the fish, kind of bring his nose in towards the bank. If he's tired and it's appropriate, he's on his side, I'm going to grab his tail. And that grip on the tail is everything. If you do it right, you can control that fish. He's going to thrash around much less in the water, and it's just all around much better. So what happens a lot of times is guys that don't know, they're going to grab that tail like a baseball bat, and it kind of folds the tail and it will squeeze out, and you just don't get a good grip. But you think of the tail, there's kind of a knuckle right before that caudal fin curves up into the tail. And if you pinch down on that tail, more like a vice grip comes down, or like a pipe wrench, it comes down top and bottom, straight down. And if you pinch that way, there's some magic to that grip, and you can get a really good solid grip on those fish. So those are a couple things that I feel are really important about landing fish. If at all possible, when I'm landing a fish, I don't grab the leader. When I was first guiding, I remember doing that a few times, and that's when things go wrong.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
There's no longer the shock absorption of the rod tip.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. No, the funny thing is, I mentioned the Ed Ward thing. This was from, I think, one of the Skagit Master videos, and he. The funny thing was that fish broke him off when he grabbed the leader on video.
Oh, it did.
Yeah, it was hilarious. And the other thing that was fun about that is that because I never really watched the Skagit Master. I was kind of a little bit late to the Spey game and sort of stuff, but it was interesting because that day I think they had been talking, at least on that video, they had fished 9 days without touching a fish, and and they finally got this fish, which he lost. But, it just shows you again for the beginner out there, or anybody that, one of the great steelhead fishermen, those guys are out there for 9 days without touching a fish. So, that stuff can happen too. That can happen as well.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting inflection point on today's, our fisheries, our fish runs. This year, a lot of our runs numbers seem to be on the downside. And so, for anglers to have appropriate expectations when they go out and fish, the swung fly strategy is the hardest way to do it. Yeah. And as a fishing guide, we can get them if they're there. Yeah. If there are no fish there,
that's right.
You don't get them.
How do you do that when you have those days that are? Obviously you're a teacher as well, so people are learning things. But is that a pretty a good struggle for you when you have those days when you're not getting into fish?
Yeah, I mean, any day you're struggling to find fish is always tough on a fishing guide in some ways, but that I think it's about kind of managing expectations. If a guy goes out and he's never cast a spey rod before, and his expectation he's going to catch 5 fish,
right.
he's in the wrong boat. But if he's going to look at it as, hey, I'm going to go out, I'm going to learn how to cast this thing and deliver and how to swing and manage my fly as it swings across, he's going to have a lot better day. And then you get a fish, it's a bonus. For me personally, my goal is to start with 1 fish per client every day. That's where we start. Mm-hmm. And that's, and sometimes, or a lot of times, that means I'm coaching that guy because he's got his summer steelhead strategy full on. He's not employing the winter techniques, or the conditions warrant a certain thing, or his cast is not getting the fly out there. Yeah. And that's kind of all where it starts. You've got to be able to get the fly out there.
Gotcha. Okay. And one other note, just on the fly setup, are you typically using, I know the barbless and barbed hook, debate is out there. Do you typically try to use barbless flies, or is that something that you think about a lot?
It isn't something I think about a lot, because steelhead, for one, this is my personal opinion, they're hard enough to catch as it is. Yeah. And when you unhook a steelhead with a microbarb, so for example, I'll use the aqua flies, which they have a new barbless fly, which is awesome. Mm-hmm. Or I use the Gamakatsu octopus style hook, which is a small barb. And generally speaking, I can get that hook out just fine without damaging the fish, but I also have some confidence in knowing that it's going to stay on a little better. Yeah. Now there are times when you hook a fish, every now and then, you hook a fish and it just takes it in the gills, and there's really nothing you can do about that, whether it's barbed or barbless. They estimate that it's like 3% mortality on sport caught fish, from the studies that have been done. And so I think there are some things that we can do to minimize our impact there. One is, when we're using stinger style flies, if we position those flies, and you'll notice all 5 of the patterns that aqua flies carries of mine, they have a small lead eye on them. It's kind of your classic intruder concept, is that lead eye helps the hook ride a certain way. So it orients the hook point to the upside of the fly pattern. So if it's tied correctly, in my mind, that's going to, it's going to help you reduce the amount of snags that you get. If your hook point is down, you're going to snag up more and lose more flies. But 2, and most importantly, is by having the hook point oriented up, you're reducing the amount of hookups that actually end up in the gills. So that's an important part of just, taking responsibility for the pattern that you're using. I've also seen where guys tie the stinger hook on there. It's too long, and that stinger hook gets back in places you don't want it to. So the fly position, how the hook orientation is on the fly, that can make an important difference in our successfully releasing wild steelhead. Yeah,
those are good points there. And I was just thinking back, trying to find the episode here. So Scott McGarva in episode 17 made that same point about the stinger hooks. In fact, I think he might have even said he doesn't really use those anymore, just because so many people are, their hooks are way too long, and it's defeating the purpose of the whole idea of, again, what Ed Ward and those guys created when they first started that style of fly. So cool. Well, those are good points. I did want to touch on one other thing too, on as far as leaders. Can you talk about, I've had this question in the audience as far as, whether you're using an intermediate, full, like sinking, kind of getting down and dirty. Is your leader the same, or are you changing that up for winter steelhead?
So when it comes to the leader that I use off the end of the sink tip, there's several keys that go into that. One, using a heavy enough, stout enough line that I'm not going to worry about it breaking off. So I'm typically using like 12 pound. And then two, and most importantly, it's short. If you tie on your 9-foot tapered leader that you use on your dry line on the Deschutes River, you're going to catch very few winter steelhead. Because the mass of the fly, the sink tip pushes it down, right? But the mass of that fly resists going down and resists sinking. And the longer the leader is, the less effective your sink tip is. So I keep most of my leader lengths off the end of the sink tip about 3 feet long.
Oh, yeah.
That's all you really need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's surprising how short you can actually catch them. I had a guy who was, 2 clients, and I'm with one guy, and the other guy snagged up or something, lost his fly, lost part of the leader, just tied on another one. It was only like maybe 15 inches long, right? And he's fishing away, hooks a fish, and I'm run down there to help him land his fish. And I'm like, what the heck is this? He's got a foot or 15 inches of leader off the end of the sink tip.
Nice.
So.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, 3 feet, that's definitely nice and short. That makes sense. And are you, with your flies, you've got a little bit of weight on the end, but you're not necessarily weighting these flies other than that?
No, I'm not. I typically will use a small lead eye, but I'll have really a wide. I keep a range of patterns to kind of help me fine tune where that fly sits and the depth of the water. So low and clear, I've just got, unweighted flies, in heavier water. I might have the slightly larger, but I like having that small lead eye to help orient that hook point if at all possible. But there's days where that's just too much.
Yeah.
Well, I will throw out the other thing that I do when it comes to that leader and fly connection is I almost always am using a loop knot to tie that fly on. I think it's just one of those little, a million of little details that add up to our success, and this is just one of them. The loop knot, I use a Lefty's loop knot, which is a fixed loop knot that allows that fly to just dangle and move and dance and a little bit more animated in the undulations of the current underneath, so that, it's just, to me, I think it just adds that little bit more allure, a little bit more draw that gets those fish to grab that fly.
So I always have kind of the 2, 2, and 2, which is like the top 2 flies, top 2 tips, and top 2 resources that you'd recommend. And you mentioned a couple flies. Can you highlight those again if you had to pick 2 winter steelhead flies?
Well, if I had to pick 2 winter steelhead flies, I would tell you that my provider, the Crandall's provider by Aquaflies, is just absolutely, it rocks them. It's a great pattern. That one, and then the other one would be the Devil's Candy.
Okay.
I've got more steelhead on those 2 patterns than probably anything else. Just deadly.
Perfect. And then, do you have a couple? You've talked about some tips already here, but any other general winter steelhead tips for somebody?
Kind of a general one would be keep your hooks sharp. We're working to get that fly down a lot of times, so we hit some rocks now and then, and you might work so hard for a fish to grab, and then you find out your hook was dull. It's really a bummer. So, the difference between a good story and a great photo sometimes is just a sharp hook. So that would be one. The other tip I would throw out there would be, it comes to, catching them on a spey rod, you really do yourself a favor to get a good spey casting lesson. The more efficient you are at the casting end of things, just the more effective you're going to be with catching winter steelhead.
Yeah. That's a good point. And then what about resources? You have some resources. Obviously, you mentioned your videos and some stuff there. Is there any other resources you would recommend for somebody? They could be online or local or anything.
Another thing that we do that's really a great, very effective way to learn a lot about winter steelhead is we do some winter steelhead workshops. We do one on the Clackamas, and we do one on the Tillamook area rivers, and basically shows you where to go, how to do it, and what techniques to utilize. Go through the on-water session with the techniques that we talked about today, and really give people a lot of good tools for success. So those are some really great affordable classes that be very valuable for folks.
Gotcha. Okay, no, those are good. And you have, so is the, what would you say is the piece of work that you've done that you're kind of most proud of, or something that is the most useful for people? Would it be a video or something else?
I'd say probably the Winter Spey Strategies DVD.
Yeah.
It really kind of changes the game a little bit from, so many anglers out there accustomed to the summer strategies, and they try to implement that during the winter, and they get, frustrated, or they don't even do it anymore. They get so frustrated and don't find success. And I think that DVD is one of the ways that you can educate yourself and really find some more effective tools to have when it comes to winter steelhead fishing with the spey rod.
Okay. And did you have, over the years you mentioned, Larry Sporting Goods and things like that. Is there some people that you would consider mentors that helped you, up your game or get to where you are today?
Yeah, there sure are. I mean, there's a ton of different guys that over the years, spent time on rivers with me and really coaching me and kind of taking me under their wing per se. But one character really stands out, and that's Mike Dooley. He had a company called Action Anglers for a lot of years, and really an excellent fly fishing guide. He knew fishing, he knew rivers, he knew people and interacting with people, and just what it took to have a good time out on the river. And I learned a lot from Mike. I mean, including some of the great pranks that he pulled on me and stuff like that. But really, really a good guy.
Nice. What was the most memorable prank he pulled?
Well, one of them, which was really turned into a great lesson for me on steelhead fishing. But when I first started with him, we were working on the Deschutes River, and he was guiding this great group of guys from Louisiana. These guys were just awesome. And I was the bagger. I was the guy that rode down and set up the camp.
Yep.
And one night Mike comes to me and he says, "Rob, I'm kind of embarrassed. I screwed up. I didn't pack dinner for tomorrow night. I don't have dinner in the cooler." So he says, I'd really love you to try and catch a steelhead tomorrow. So, man, I was so excited. I was like, yeah, that's a job I can do, So I packed up that, they took off on their guide thing, for the day. And I packed up that camp faster than I ever packed it up. And I was setting out to, go get a steelhead. And this was a fall trip. It was like October, right?
Yep.
So it's cold, chilly morning. And I go to grab my waders, and Mike had grabbed my waders.
Oh, nice.
So I've got this order to catch fish for dinner, but no waders.
Oh, man.
So it worked out really awesome. So there's this one particular run where there's this big rock in that run. And so, there's always a fish somewhere around that. So I got my drift boat. The Deschutes, of course, you can't fish out of the boat, right? So I dropped the anchor and nosed the boat up onto that rock and hopped out on that rock, unhooked my fly, and I kind of turned around to check and make sure that the boat was where it was supposed to be. And when I turned around, my fly had dropped into the water. By the time I turned my head back around, I had a steelhead on.
No way.
And
wow.
So it was just one of those really memorable lessons to start close.
Yep.
So many times with the spey rod, we start out, casting a pile of line. So,
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
One of the many shenanigans.
That's a good one. Okay, well, I got a little rapid fire round for you here. We'll get through the rest of these questions, and it shouldn't take long. But so you mentioned a little bit sled. It sounds like you have a sled. If you had to pick between, a sled, a drift boat, or raft, which one are you taking?
that's tough. Probably the drift boat, just because you could use that most any day, most conditions, and they're nice to fish out of. The raft's a little bit wetter and whatnot. So
cool.
I'd say probably the drift boat.
That's a good one. I asked Tom Larimer that same question. He kind of struggled with it too, but he went with the sled. So I don't have a sled, so I'd be picking between the other two. But no, that's good to hear. What about so a spey casting tip? Do you have a quick little tip for somebody that's struggling with their spey cast? Yeah,
sure. So it all starts with a good anchor point, and it seems like so much of people's cast are they're going to be struggling with it and their alignment and power of the cast, just simply because their anchor point isn't in the right spot. And people kind of, they lose track of what they're looking at. They might be looking at the end of their line. They might be looking at their fly or these different markers. But if you just remember to get that fly within a rod's length of you, that's where you want to start. So that would be one simple tip that really can make your cast work so much better. Starting with that can really make a difference.
Nice. Okay. And as far as thinking about a typical day when you take a client out, are you typically doing like a half day or a full sort of day on the river?
Generally, the full day. For the most part, we do a couple half-day shad fishing trips, just kind of a totally different thing. Our fisheries are either full day or multi-days, where we do 2, 3, 4, 5 days on the water.
Okay, and do you have a typical? So I guess if you're fishing a full day, how many runs do you think on average are you fishing during that day?
So you kind of break it down to maybe 2 or 3 runs in the morning, lunch, 2 or 3 runs in the afternoon. Kind of depends. With the sled, we can get in a few more pieces of water, just because you're moving between runs more quickly. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of what I would count on.
Okay.
Maybe up to half a dozen runs in a day. Sometimes more, sometimes less. If you're on a small stream, like small coastal rivers, you might have a lot more. Some days I have, say I have just one client on a coastal river. I love hitting a lot of little pockets. Okay, just behind that rock, 5 casts. Okay, we're moving on, and just hit this part of that run. And so we fish a lot of different stuff.
That's what I was just going to say. Yeah, as far as tips on finding good water, it sounds like, obviously where a lot of the runs are now, but if somebody was new to it, any tips? Should they be focusing more on the upper ends of the runs, the lower ends of the runs, or do you think just covering the run?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When you fish a run over and over and over again for years, you will generally find that most runs are going to have a sweet spot, and you're going to catch most of your fish in that range of that sweet spot, up or down a little bit, depending on the water level. But when you don't know that, start at the top, work all the way through it, especially into that lip of the tail out, and start really high, especially early in the morning, or the water's been up a little bit. Start with that first cast, like Mike Dooley taught me. Mm-hmm. Just a short length of line out, even just the sink tip out, just flip that out, kind of clear a path as you work your way in there. But reading water, guys spend a lot of time in the wrong stuff. Yeah. Either too fast, too slow, too deep. Walking speed water, 3 to 5 feet deep, with structure in it. And what I coach people to look for are what I call steelhead funnels. And those are places where the current speed is too fast. Those fish are not going to be in those. And next to that, you've got the right zone, the right speed of water. So if you have half the river is too fast, that other half is, in that walking speed water zone. That's what you're looking for. That creates a funnel that focuses the steelhead to a particular part of the river. And that's just going to make the odds of your success so much better versus, say, you're standing on a piece of water where it's even all the way across, same depth for a long, long ways. those fish could literally be anywhere in that entire river. There's no focal point. There's no current to focus them to a specific spot. So those would be some things, when it comes to reading water and spending your time in the right places. That's kind of how I'd look at it.
Yep. Perfect. And do you have just thinking about gear, just kind of a random question, but do you have a go-to piece of, it doesn't necessarily have to be fly fishing gear, but something you kind of don't leave home without on any of your trips? Whether that's it sounds like you do a lot of Deschutes fishing, the longer trips, or if you do any traveling.
Well, just really simple stuff. I kind of have the mental checklist, but I've always got a nipper, and I have that on my waders. Mm-hmm. I've always got a hook file that's in my wader pocket. Those two things are critical to guiding. Your guy's got the perfect fly. It's catching fish, and that hook's dull. Yep. You're done.
Yeah.
So those are a couple little things, and just the right traction for me is a big deal. I haven't fallen in a long time, but I don't want to start.
Do you use a wading staff ever?
I don't. I use those big spikes that Corkers makes. It's their original big spike that, you look at them, they're really aggressive and kind of scary to people, but they grip like 4-wheel drive. Yeah. They're excellent, and I highly recommend them.
Cool.
Unless you have a wood drift boat.
That's right. Yeah, I'll leave a link in the show notes out to those Corkers too. I've chatted with them over the years, or over the last year as well. So I'm hoping to do maybe a little bit of a season on some of the companies that are out there, in the space, and I think Corkers is one that has a pretty cool product, and the way the sole removes is pretty unique too.
Absolutely.
So okay, and you mentioned the rod, so basically kind of the Sage X and the RIO, and you use RIO lines as well. Yeah, RIO, and then cool. I'll always like to get a feel for that, and then the RIO. Actually, did you mention what was the RIOs you like to use?
I use the Domain 10. Matches up really well on the 12-foot spey rod. Okay,
and I've got a couple of random questions for you here.
Yeah, sure.
I'm not sure if you're a big music fan, but do you have a favorite type of music or band or anything you like to listen to?
Kind of like when I need to relax, one of my favorites is good old Jimmy Buffett.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Little Margaritaville.
Yep, that's right.
Cool. Yeah, that's all right. Cool. And what about a drink? I'm not sure if you're, the evening after either a good or, you get a big steelhead. Do you have a favorite beverage you like to celebrate with?
Yeah. We have been out on the river, and you got clients bringing all kinds of great stuff all the time.
Oh yeah.
From scotch to you name it. But really one of my favorites is just a good old Oregon IPA. Yep. And I have two favorites, the Bowie beer from Astoria. Mm-hmm. And then there's one Bent Shovel IPA. It's right out of Barton, Oregon, right up there, down the street from where my folks still live. So
cool.
Kind of a good stuff.
Cool. Yeah, I'll have to check those out. Definitely the Bowie. Yeah, I've had the Bowie. That's good. I'm a big IPA-er too. Yeah, I've just started to dig into. I always stayed away from like the double IPAs and stuff, because I always thought they were like going to be this extreme sort of thing. But yeah, I've been testing out a few, and you know what? I actually like the taste. It's actually a little bit strong. I guess it has more alcohol as well, but I kind of almost go with the double IPA now than I do just a regular.
It kind of grows on you, doesn't it?
Yeah, something like that. Okay. So cool. Well, I had one other question I just want to check with you on, and it's more going back to that moment when you're all in. Do you remember that moment when you're a full-time guide now, I think. So, when you look back and you knew this was going to be your full-time income, do you remember that moment?
Well, I had, it's kind of interesting, when I went to college, I wrote a business plan. My business plan was, a guided fishing business. Oh. And, I told you about working at Larry's Sports Center. We would go out and we'd fish. I worked the afternoon to closing. And so me and my buddies would go and fish before work. And we were really consistently catching steelhead. And so, I had guys all the time. How was the fishing? And, can I go along? I'm like, sure. Yeah, I'll take you. You never caught a steelhead before? Sure. Let's go. Let's get you one.
Yeah.
And then There was a particular client that was like, or guy, it wasn't a client at that point. He was like, I would pay you to do this. And it was kind of like one of those, light bulbs went off in my head. Like, gosh, maybe I should, kind of look at this.
Huh. That's awesome. That's awesome. Good stuff. Okay. Well, Rob, in the next 6 to 12 months, do you have anything you want to note as far as new coming up for you? Anything that we can keep an eye out for?
Yeah, we have a couple really fun things coming up. We have a guest chef that's going to be with us on the lower Deschutes. We're doing a pre-salmon fly, and this year, depending on the snowpack, it might actually be perfect timing for a salmon fly hatch. The guy is just an incredible chef, voted one of the best restaurants in Portland. His specialty is cooking over coals, and we've had him down at our coastal place before to cook for us. He's amazing. So we're going to have him down on the Deschutes for 3 days, doing all the meals for us, spoiling us in that regard while we're catching some awesome trout. Nice. And then have a really neat trip this year with Dave Hughes, the author, writer, that guy. He's a great guy. When I was editor of Fly Fishing and Time Journal magazine right after Dave, and so we correlated on a lot of things. Really a fun guy, but a master of trout fishing. Mm-hmm. And so Dave's going to join us on a 3-day float trip in June on the Deschutes River, kind of helping folks kind of get a better understanding of matching the hatch and, just unlocking those riddles of the hatch so you can be a better and more effective trout angler.
That's awesome. Yeah, I had Rick Hafley on, Hafley and Hughes, I had Hafley on. He was really a great guest. I'm trying to remember the episode, but it was in a recent episode. And then, and I have talked to Dave. I think he had some issues, maybe a complication with something, but I think he's doing better now. So I'm hoping to also get him. Well, it sounds like, he's going out with you, so he must be doing better.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's awesome.
He's doing good.
Good. So, so I'm hoping to have Hughes on as well. There's so many. That's the challenge with this show. There's so many great people out there. I'm trying to get around and do my best to cover it. So, I'll keep working on it. But so that's about all I have for you. As far as if people want to find you, so it'll be watertimeoutfitters.com is the best place.
Yeah, that's great. Watertimeoutfitters.com.
Okay.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Appreciate you coming on. Definitely. We dug into some tips. I'm going to get this one out there pretty quick so people can, I think we covered some winter steelhead stuff that's going to help people get going. So appreciate you coming on, and we'll keep in touch.
All right. Thanks a lot, partner.
Okay. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
So there you go. If you want to find all the show notes with all the links we covered, just go to wetflyswing.com/62. That's 62. If you want to support the show, head over to wetflyswing.com/support and join this little micro movement we're slowly building day by day, download by download. Everybody is going for it here. So wanted to send I think it's time again for the emoji shout out. So if you're still hanging in, I'd love to see a keyboard head smash emoji. So Google that one up if you don't know what it is, and take a look and send me something over on social to let me know you enjoyed the show today. Thanks again for stopping by to check out the show today. I'm looking forward to catching up with you soon and hope to maybe see you online or maybe on the river.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.